What's up, people? Welcome to another weekly edition of the Black and Gold Hour podcast, a podcast that's centered around the New Orleans Saints. And it finally happened. The Saints had their first preseason game of the season. The new era has begun. And I was in attendance in Baltimore, in Maryland, and all I know is it's going to be a very exciting season, no matter what happens, no matter who's the quarterback. And today I have a very special guest here with me today to talk about Saints football. Now, a couple of weeks ago, I had WWL Sports Radio, Christian Garrick on to talk Saints football. And I have another member of the WWL family. I have sports digital producer, Jeff Nowak on the line. How are you today, Jeff?
I'm doing good. It's, we're 3.5 weeks into training camp now. And training camp's obviously a long grind for the players, but I don't think most people realize how long of a grind it is for the media. Louisiana sun for 3 hours every morning, and then going back and having to write. I'm much darker than I was at the beginning. My girlfriend was making fun of me because I took my shoes off, and it's like just pale as a sheet. And then anyway, but it's never dull, especially around this team.
Man, and we really thank you all in the media because you guys are giving us that content. I don't know about you, Jeff, but I feel like this has been the most exciting off season for Saints fans since 2006. I mean, this has been super exciting.
Is one way to put it.
Yeah, exciting.
There are a few other adjectives you could use, but exciting, definitely not boring.
All I can say is Saints fans, the emotions have went through a whole season already. There's been super high and there's been low lows. There's been arguments. There's arguments probably going on right now on Twitter as we speak about the state of the New Orleans Saints. And today we're here kind of to just talk about the first 3 weeks as well as the last preseason game and what's next for the New Orleans Saints. But Jeff, I have to ask you, as I do with all of my guests, I have to ask you, what led to you loving sports and what led to you creating content centered around the New Orleans Saints?
I grew up watching football. It's always been football for me, and then everything else. But I grew up in New England, Connecticut. I moved down to South Carolina, covered sports down in the Myrtle Beach area for about 4 years. That was mostly high schools and Coastal Carolina. If you LSU fans will remember Coastal Carolina, the team that showed up in the Super Regionals 2016 and beat the brakes off them. And and then from there I moved down here. I was working at NOLA.com, Times-Picayune, The Advocate, for about 5 years doing digital content. The last 2 years I was there, my job kind of morphed into more full-time sports, which was a welcome change. And so the last 2 years I've been covering the Saints firsthand, whereas before I had been doing it digitally, from a desk in a newsroom. And then, so obviously the first year it went splendidly. I got to go to the games. They let me in the building. I was in the locker room talking to players. Then 2020 happened, and I had to learn how to do that all from this room, my spare bedroom in my house, which has kind of become my control center. I don't have any lights around me. These are just screens lighting up my face. But yeah, it's been interesting. It's been really nice to be able to get back out to camp this year because I wasn't able to go last year. We only were allowed 2 media members and one at a time. We had to trade off. So I didn't make the cut, but it's as much as I joke about how tiring it is really nice to be able to get back out there for sure.
Right. And you've been one of the people that I followed for a long time. Nick Underhill. We got some quite a few people, Ross Jackson, that I follow just to give me that Saints content, especially being one of the Saints fans that live in a different state. Is just always having that 24/7 media rolling about the New Orleans Saints. But I have to ask you, what was it like last year? It was a pandemic going on, and how does that affect a media person such as yourself?
I mean, it was lonely. I got lonely a lot. It's funny because even after that, there was just nothing to cover. There's nothing to go to cover. So I spent a lot of time by myself. I talked to my dog a lot. And it was like when I like going out to camp. Actually, the first in-person thing I covered in probably a year was Willie Green's press conference. So when he got hired to the Pelicans, right? And so it's like I have to relearn how to talk to people in person, not over Zoom. But I've gotten good at Zoom. So it's like, wait, can't we just talk on Zoom? I'm good at that now. But no, I had to relearn how to do that. But no, it's been really great to be able to get out and just see all the people because it's a pretty tight knit with the group of, I think, and it's true on a lot of NFL teams, the beat writers, the columnists, everyone knows each other. Even if you don't hang out, it's like you appreciate each other when you follow each other and you read each other's work. So it's nice to be able to see those people again. Even the people that I worked with previously, I switched jobs in June. I get to go out and see those people. So it's it's great even around the game itself. But it's really difficult to analyze the game without seeing it firsthand. The broadcast angle of games just does not show you nearly enough. So much of an NFL game is determined by what the safeties are doing, and you literally can't see the safeties on the broadcast angle. You can't tell whether the middle of the field's open, whether it's closed, whether they're playing too high, and it's it's very frustrating because you have to kind of wait till you see the all-22 to be able to figure out what the heck happened on a particular play. And the all-22 is gone now, thanks to the NFL in Game Pass. So that's a whole nother issue, but at least I can see it. So
right.
But I think analysis and just coverage of the teams was definitely impacted by that because everyone's on Zoom. It's just not the same. You're not getting the same type of just genuine answers, the ability to follow up. It's all metered. Everyone has the same quotes. Everyone's writing the exact same story. Because that's the nice thing about having so many people out there is you just get this natural variety of what people are writing about that day. We all listen to the same press conference. We all, but we all take something different away from it. We all write different versions of these stories, different elements. And that's been nice to see get back this year for sure.
Right. And I agree with you. I'm not a media person just yet, an official media person, but I had the opportunity to just sit really close to the game because it was a preseason game on Saturday. And I felt like I was media. I saw everything, the safeties. I was able to call holds. I was like, I'm spoiled now. I can't even watch it from home anymore. So I really appreciated that experience. But let's kind of talk about that game. The Saints played the Baltimore Ravens. They did lose 17-14. There were some highs and some things that we kind of raised the eyebrow about. But I want to ask you, if you had a Saints fan that didn't watch the game and you wanted to tell them one important thing from that game, what would you say about the Saints' first preseason game in Baltimore?
One thing.
One takeaway from that game.
Hold on to the damn ball. I mean, seriously, and I wasn't there either. I didn't get to travel for this one. But some of the people on the ground said they were sitting in the media room and they could hear Sean Payton screaming from the locker room about turnovers. And I don't care about the quarterback battle. I don't care about who's the starting wide receiver. You can't put the ball on the ground. It doesn't matter if you turn the ball over 6 times in a game. You could have the best quarterback in the world. You're going to lose that game. Especially if you're not turning the ball over on your own side, which the Saints did pretty well. But, and the reason it stuck out even more than it's just a sloppy preseason game, it was the veterans that were turning the ball over. It was Taysom Hill and Ty Montgomery not connecting on a in a choice route per se. It's a zone man read, and they made different reads. You had Jameis. Well, that interception wasn't primarily on Jameis. Probably could have delivered a better ball, but that was a freak interception. He had Devontae Freeman and Latavius Murray, 2 guys who are on the team in part because they're reliable, putting the ball on the ground. The score doesn't matter in a preseason game, but that fumble took at least 3 points off the board. And that's just the type of thing that you can't have. And it's extra bizarre because Latavius Murray has not fumbled in a game in 5 years. And he just put the ball on the ground. And so, you you got to figure that out. This team has enough working against it already in terms of the personnel, in terms of trying to replace all these key positions. They have to play clean football to have a chance. And that was just not an example of that.
Right, and Jeff, it was so frustrating. I mean, it's just like some slippery was on the ball. Like every time they got some type of rhythm, the ball kind of slipped out. And like you said, no matter who your quarterback is, no matter what the score is, honestly, the fact the score was 17-14 with 6 turnovers, that's a win on the defensive end.
Right, and I think the defense played well. I think the defense has shown all camp that if you play smart football on offense, if you control field position, if you control time of possession, and you don't give the ball away, you score on the opportunities you create, you're going to have a chance to win. This is a good defense. They might have questions at cornerback, specifically, the outside corner opposite Marshawn Lattimore. But this pass rush is as good as I have seen. I don't want to say ever, but it's as good as I've seen the Saints have in years. And I mean, they've had really good pass rush groups in the past, but just top to bottom, they just have this group of beasts. I mean, I don't even know how to describe it. You're talking about Cam Jordan, 6'4", like 240, 250. He's the smallest guy out there. Right. Marcus Davenport, for all the junk he gets thrown at him, has looked like a machine. Peyton Turner, he's been hurt the last few days, which is concerning because you want to see a rookie get those reps in the preseason. Right. I think a lot of rookies were hurt last year by not having a preseason. And, he's going to be in the same boat if he's not able to get on the field. We haven't heard anything about his injury status, but you really want to see him out there. Pete Werner's also not out there, another rookie. But, that defensive line can carry this team. They have really good safeties. They have really good linebacker play. And it's just a matter of putting the defense in position to help you win a game. And you can't do that if they're playing on a short field. You can't do that if you're leaving points out on the field.
Right. And I say this all the time, especially the last, I'll say season and a half. Yeah, season and a half. I'll say the defense, which is something you would have never heard any Saints fan say. The defense was my favorite side of the ball to watch. That was the side of the ball that I trusted. That's been the most consistent. And I mean, the defensive line, they got a full rotation. You know how basketball, they talk about you need a full 12-man roster. They have the equivalent of that on the defensive line. And I'm excited to see what they do. And that's not the side of the ball that I'm most concerned about. But I do want to ask you, in regards to the defense, who was a player that stood out for you on Saturday?
Well, I mean, there were a few that stood out. Right. One guy who I'd say probably, I don't know if he has a good chance to make the roster, but he's making a hell of a case for it, is Eric Burrell. I mean, he was all over the place. There is, the safety group is really entrenched at the top with Marcus Williams, Malcolm Jenkins, and you have CJ, who's really the nickel corner. But the depth there is kind of open to be taken, those depth spots. And so and PJ Williams, I don't want to forget about him. But you're going to keep a 5-6 safeties. Usually you keep the 10 or 11 defensive backs and you split those between cornerbacks and safeties. The position doesn't really matter toward the end because you're talking about special teams guys primarily. You got guys like JT Gray, but that's people like there's going to be players that make the roster because they stand out in the open field. They stand out on special teams. They stand out as a gunner. And those are the preseason games are where you make that impression. You can do it all training camp, but until you do it on the field where there's an actual opponent, I don't think it really sinks in. And he made an impact in that game. He forced a turnover. He had another big hit. He played really well. So if I'm looking for a guy down the roster that I wasn't, anticipating being impressed with going in, I'd have to say it was him.
Right. And yeah, let's just take a moment just to talk about that hit. That hit was crazy. I mean, I watched it about 3 or 4 times. Not the safest of hits. Not the greatest of form.
I'd like to see him get his head up. You don't want to go in like a torpedo there, but they talk about putting the helmet on the ball, and that's what he did.
He definitely did that. Did that. And he was balling, and he's someone we would definitely want to see continue to develop over the course of this off season. So let's switch to the offensive side of the ball. that is the side of the ball that has the most concern. We're going through QB training camp battles. We have questions at the wide receiver group. But I want to ask you, is there a player that Saints fans might not be talking about that stood out to you on Saturday?
Well, you've kind of already pointed out that Saints fans talk about everybody, so it doesn't. It's hard to find someone that people are ignoring.
Yeah, this is the wrong fan base to kind of say.
Right. It feels like this is the only fan base I've ever been around where like the average fan knows about the probably the 80th person on the depth chart that's not going to make the roster, and like they'll drop a pass in a meaningless like one-on-one rep, and you'll get these like scorching hot takes immediately. It's honest, it's incredible, but it can be awful too. So you kind of have to take the good with the bad, but. It's tough because, like I said, we do kind of go into everybody. It is a 90-man roster, but that's really not that big of a roster. You're talking about, 40 offensive players, and but we're talking about a skill position, which I think is usually the point of these conversations in terms of sleepers.
Right.
Is I don't want to say so. One guy I've been high on is Lil Jordan Humphrey. I don't think that he's hidden, considering he had 5 targets in that game.
Right.
But I do see some concerning things with him, especially over the last few days at camp. And, the larger picture too is I don't know if his hands are good enough as a big wide receiver, but he's going to get his chances. He's going to get his opportunities. And he needs to improve that. He had a couple drops today where, just hit him in the hands. And these are difficult catches. The catch he did not make that went for the interception was a difficult catch. But it's one that as a big wide receiver, as a 6'4" wide receiver, you got to be able to make, because those are the catches that you're going to be presented with over and over and over again. Michael Thomas, never been a fast guy, but he runs, razor sharp routes, and when he gets his hand on the ball, you couldn't pry it loose with a crowbar. That's the type of player you really need to be to succeed as a big bodied wide receiver who's not going to be able to run away from people. So I am optimistic about Lil Jordan, but I think that he needs to work on how he operates at the point of the catch. He needs to work on his body control to use that 6'4" frame to shield himself from the defender and allow himself to catch that ball. I think that too often he allows the defender to get into his body when he can just box a guy out like he's a basketball player and make that catch easily. But he's a guy that I think is going to have an opportunity on this roster. Obviously, they signed Kevin White today, which is going to be interesting. First round pick, hasn't panned out, but no one's talking about him yet because he just got here. But he did have a touchdown in team drills today, and he won a one-on-one rep and then high stepped into the end zone. So he's a confident guy. I'd look out for him.
Look, the Saints just give them 24 hours. They only need 24 hours, and we'll be talking about Kevin White. We'll have arguments going on. We'll have the whole conversations. But I want to ask you, and especially talking about Lil Jordan Humphrey, it seems like everybody on the roster in the fan base wants him to win. And it seems like I watch his press conferences. He's a humble guy. He's learning and he's improving. That's what he says. He's improving every day. So I definitely want to see him make the roster. But I have to ask you about the running back group. Now, I know you and Christian Garrett kind of put together a 53-man projection. And you talked about how the New Orleans Saints may include, 5 running backs this year, including the fullback. And I want to talk about Tony Jones Jr. Right. And I want to ask you, do you believe that Saints fans should be excited about what Tony Jones Jr. can bring to the New Orleans Saints roster? I mean, we've been excited about other players like Boston Scott in the past, but what separates Tony Jones Jr. this year around?
Well, I mean, I still really like Boston Scott. I still really like Devin Azigbo.
Right.
The problem for those players at that point was there was just not a lot of. It was a lot harder to make the Saints roster at that point. Their depth was a lot better, and so it's not to say the players on this roster aren't good, but there are a lot more question marks and a lot more opportunity to play your way into a role. Like I was talking about Eric Burrell. I don't know if Boston Scott could have played any better in the preseason. There just wasn't a spot for him. And sometimes that's the case, especially with a team that drafts and acquires talent as well as the Saints do. But with that being said, what Tony Jones did in that game was not a mirage. You know, he's been working all camp. I've been, if I go back through my notes, which is just like a running scrawl of nonsense,
right.
Time, you'll come across like, oh, Tony Jones popped a run. Tony Jones popped a run. There was one that he casually just took for 70 yards for a touchdown that no one talked about again. And you just hear him running back up the field. And I want to say it was Dwayne maybe. He's like, oh, what gap did you hit? He was like, C gap. And he's like, oh, cool. And he ran back up the field. And it's like, it's just a guy who wants to be there, really enjoys it. And he's good. I mean, he's not a guy who's gonna dance around the backfield. He's a guy who's gonna make one hard cut, get to the hole and hit it with speed. And you're gonna have to tackle him because he's built like a fire hydrant. You know, he's thick. So yeah, I mean, I really like Tony Jones. The issue is gonna be, is there a spot on the roster? So we had the Saints keeping 5 running backs. That includes a fullback. They could opt to go without a fullback if they prefer to run, a tight end at the H, maybe a Troutman or a Juwan Johnson. I think Juwan's going to make the roster. So you're probably going to have 3. We gave him 4 tight ends. Me and Christian were split on that. I was leaning more towards 3, but that was my concession to him was we're going to put Ethan Wolf on there. And I like Ethan Wolf, so I wasn't complaining too much. But when you kind of try to shake that out, it's difficult because you want to keep that 4th tight end. You got to cut someone somewhere else. We ended up keeping 5 linebackers instead of 6, which meant Andrew Dowell doesn't make the roster. Another guy that has shined in camp. So it's tough. And you have Devontae Freeman, really good player. I really like Devontae Freeman. He's a good veteran presence. But again, you have that guy on the roster because you want to be able to trust. He's a guy you can trust in the locker room. That fumble is not going to endear him to the coaches, but I don't think he's going to miss the roster because of that fumble. Dwayne Washington's a guy who's made the team for 3 years. So to keep Tony Jones on the roster, you might have to lose Dwayne Washington as a valuable special teams player. And I think that's the part of the equation that gets lost a lot of times because when you're talking about that 5th running back, it's got to be a special teams contributor. So as good as he looks in the preseason, he's not going to get all those hand touches. He's not going to get all those reps because you have Kamara, you have Murray, you have probably Devontae on there. So he's got to be a contributor on special teams, and that's just a lot harder to weigh against a guy like Dwayne Washington, who is a valuable guy there. So, I think it's very fair to be excited about him. He's a young running back. Latavius Murray is getting older. I think he's in the final year of his deal, or at least the third year of his deal. So, this is a situation where maybe they find a way to stash him on the practice squad and they bring him back next year. But I think he could very much make the roster. It just depends how they allocate those roster spots.
Right. And he kind of impressed me with the speed. A lot of his was going around the corner.
You think. Yeah.
Look, he does it because he's kind of like a stocky guy. So when he was hitting the corner, I was like, oh, whoa, they're not catching him. He's kind of got that Derrick Henry, like you don't know
got
how
downhill
fast.
Speed.
Right.
It looks like he's running downhill because then that's just his body type, his running style. It works. But you have to have vision to do that. You have to be able to identify the hole. And guys who are a little more elusive have maybe an extra half second to make that decision. He doesn't have that lateral speed. He's got that one cut downhill speed, which is valuable when you use it correctly. And I think that he did last week against the Ravens. And, if he can continue to do that, I think he has a chance to make it in the league. He's only in his 2nd year at Indiana. He's gotten markedly better from what I remember seeing from him last year in practice reps, which again I wasn't there live for. But yeah, I mean, I think that the Saints are really good at developing young players, quarterback notwithstanding, because they haven't done that. And it's not a criticism; it's just a fact. They have not developed a young quarterback, unless you count Breeze, but he was already kind of they didn't start with him, so. But every other position you look at, they develop young players. You talk about everyone's kind of concerned about David Onyemata being suspended 6 games. And it's like, yeah, he's suspended 6 games, but so what do these other guys have to offer? David Onyemata wasn't this high profile prospect when he got there either. He grew into that. They molded him into that and he worked to get there. And these guys have been working behind him. So I'm excited to see what those guys have. And so, I mean, there's a reason that these depth guys come in and perform well, and it's because they're prepared and they're coached very well.
Right. And you brought it up. You brought up the quarterback position. So,
oh no, what have I done?
Let's kind of talk about the quarterback position, because I gotta ask you your opinion. You've been around the guys. You're doing the media for the Saints and on the Saints, and I want to ask you, in your opinion, where does Taysom Hill and Jameis Winston stand in the eyes of the coaching staff? Is there any separation? How are they feeling?
Yeah, it's so tough. It's so tough because not only does it feel like they're even, that's the cop out to say, oh, they're kind of even.
Right.
They're just neither of them has separated themselves. Neither of them has been remarkably good. Neither of them has been remarkably bad. Each has made really nice throws in certain situations, and each has just thrown ducks. And I wish I could sit here and say that, watching them every day in practice, one of them has been the clear option, and I just can't. And I think the longer you go with that being the case, the more likely you end up with some kind of split, And I've said this from the beginning. The best case scenario for the Saints this season is probably something around like a 70-30 split, like a real quarterback split,
right,
where Taysom Hill is getting entire series of plays, and you're taking advantage of the mismatches that you can create throughout the season. I just don't see a scenario where Sean Payton, who is the king of identifying and taking advantage of mismatches, just says, you know what, we're gonna take away this clear advantage we have of misdirection at the quarterback position, of basically being able to throw a fastball and a changeup and a curveball. You're gonna say, no, we're gonna have fastballs all the time, and I just don't see. I think that he would be fine if one of these quarterbacks really stepped into the spotlight and took that job. But from a competitive standpoint, I almost think you're better off the other way. And throughout the season, it'll just give them the opportunity to show, okay, so if Jameis Winston is having this just dynamo season, then you probably pull it back and you give him the reins a little bit more, and you turn Taysom more into what he was last year. Or if Taysom Hill is just dominating, you have the ability to kind of scale that out. But at this point, it kind of feels like we're going to just ride it out and see what happens. If they were picking a quarterback today, I'd probably say Taysom Hill, because what you're going to get with Taysom. And Jameis, as good as he's been in moments, he's been really inconsistent. He was inconsistent today. He hit Lil Jordan. He dropped it in the bucket to Lil Jordan down on the sideline. They were working on 2-minute drills, so it was like 33 seconds left on the clock. They actually simulate the play clock up on the wall. They didn't have any timeouts. And he made a nice 30-yard throw down the sideline on a fade. And then he comes back and he has Lil Jordan on a fade on the other side of the field, and he just airmails it. He goes to the little Ty Montgomery in the middle of the field, and it's just not. I think it was the right read, but he just didn't throw the right ball. Then there was a throwaway, and that's the kind of the inconsistency that is really kind of makes it difficult to identify, okay, who's winning this quarterback?
Right.
The coaches will go back and review the film. Jameis told us earlier in the offseason that he actually gets a kind of a report with every decision he's made. It gets a decision grade, and he goes off it from there. So they're analyzing this a lot deeper than I am capable of doing, because I don't have the film to go over. They hide that in a vault somewhere. But there's probably some lean in a direction within the coaching staff. It's just neither of the quarterbacks has made it obvious, and until they do, I don't think you're going to hear anything from the coaching staff in terms of who they're going with.
So Jeff, I gotta ask you, because last week I watched ESPN and they were talking about the New Orleans Saints, which is rare, and they had a lengthy segment about the fact that it is neck and neck. Is that a bad sign for fans that are rooting for Jameis Winston to be the starting quarterback? Is it looking more like Taysom?
Well, it's a tough question, because yes, but only because you're framing that ultimate decision around it has to be starter Jameis, starter Taysom. The other one is gone, right? Like, and I don't think that kind of absolute option tree is the actual option tree that you can choose from. So it's kind of it's almost a disingenuous way to approach it, but that's this is sports talk, so you got to do it somehow. You got to push the envelope somewhere. But yeah, and I think in that kind of realm of how we're going to go about this logically, yes, I think it does, because if you have to break a tie somewhere, right? If you have to pick a quarterback and you have to make it on the basis of something, like I said before, a tie would probably go to the guy you've seen in a game, you at least know what to expect from. And because a tie would also mean that Jameis did not put himself in a winning position in that quarterback battle. And, while they came into this from, the same starting blocks, the reason people are excited about Jameis Winston is because they expect great things out of Jameis Winston. And he was a number 1 overall pick.
Right.
He's a Heisman winner. He should be out here dazzling. And that just hasn't been the case, right? And when you have a guy like Taysom, he doesn't have to show the parts of his game that are a nightmare to defend, because we already know they are. We already know what he can do with his legs. He just has to show, he's trying to show what he can do with his arm. But that still exists. Like, he's not out here running every play, but we know that if they put him in the starting job, that's a part of the Saints game plan that they can now open up.
Absolutely.
And so if they're even, you have to, the tie, it's kind of a corny way to put it, but the tie goes to the runner, I think. It's not, and it's different in a football sense, but it still makes sense. And so, yeah, I mean, if you're approaching it kind of from the absolute, like, one guy has to win and they're even, I think that's a fair thing to say, that Taysom would probably get the edge there.
Right. It's kind of like playing Madden. If both players have a rating of 50, but Taysom has a speed of 95, you're going with Taysom every time you pick up the stick. So I feel like, that's where a lot of fans are feeling, and the arguments are happening every day, but we're going to continue to see it progress. But I want to ask you, to wrap up today's show, the Saints running back room, we already know what Alvin Kamara and Latavius Murray bring. We know what the defense brings, and you might have already answered it. What is the biggest concern for the New Orleans Saints?
In the running back room, or just overall?
In general and overall.
The biggest concern, well, yeah, I mean, we kind of touched on this a little bit. The biggest concern to me is health. So there are a lot of really good players on this football team, and I think we did Jeff Duncan over at Noah.com compiled all of our predictions for records. I was the most optimistic. I do want to point that out at 11-6, which to me, you're talking about what a team that has won 48 games the last 3 years. They've gone 13-3 each of the last 2 years with crazy injury bad luck, injury woes that they overcame. So we're talking about 11-6. That's 6 losses. That probably doesn't win you the NFC South. That puts you might not even get the top wild card seed in that scenario. And that's the most optimistic anyone was. So I think that's telling of like where we see this roster kind of struggling. But I see this team as having a lot of really talented players. Like I pointed out with the pass rush, with the offensive line, he might be the best unit in all of football. And so I think there's enough there to win a good number of games to be a playoff team. But how they were able to overcome those injuries the last few seasons was having incredible depth at pretty much every position. They beat the Lions in week 4 without either of their starting cornerbacks. How many teams do that? Right? They lost Kamara for half the season in 2019. They lost Brees for 5 games. They won 13 games that season. They have this ability to create a roster that has depth that you trust, and they trust that they can perform in those situations. That's not going to be the case this year. There are a lot of positions that you get through that top layer and there's nothing behind it. Cornerback, if you're running Marshawn Lattimore and Ken Crawley out there, great. One of those guys gets hurt, and you were looking at, an untested rookie forced to play on the outside. You're talking about guys that you just signed in training camp. So I don't know if they can overcome those injuries this year, if they happen. If you end up with that same type of just run after run of bad luck, can they overcome it? I don't think they can. So that's, to me, the biggest concern. And, so what do you do about that? There's not much you can do to a certain extent of freak injuries happen. You can only prevent so much, but I think, it is on the players, it's on the training staff. You have to be smart. You have to, make sure you're preparing, make sure you're recovering. And I think that's going to be the story of this season. If they can stay healthy, I think they have a chance. If they get hurt, if they, even like medium bad injury luck, I think they're going to be in real trouble. It could go real bad if the breaks go the wrong way. But that's true of every football season. I think we've just been spoiled by what's happened the last few years, just overall, and that could come to an end.
Right, and it's injuries happen. It's just about when are they going to happen and who they're going to happen to. And the secondary, with the way the secondary is looking, if we do find one legitimate number 2 corner, we already know what Marshawn can do. They can't get injured. It's just one of those situations where if we want to win, if we want to excel, we got to have those corners on the field, and we got to have Marcus Williams. We got to have that secondary intact. I think the defensive line, we have enough depth. Even with Wwlamfm out, we have enough depth, like you talked about, to be able to wreak havoc on offensive lines. But that secondary is something that
we don't know yet.
We don't
Seems
know
that way. But that's why this part of the football season is great, because we somehow we know everything, even though we know nothing. Right.
We got projections. We got records. Your 11-6 was higher than mine. I had this at 9 or 10 wins.
And if it's right, I will point it out immediately. If it's wrong, you will never hear about it again.
Right. But all I can say is this. I was watching the game and I was excited every single snap. I think this is the most excited I've been. I think Saints fans, this is exciting. This is a new era. This is something different from the norm that we've known for 15 years. And I'm excited to see what happens. I'm excited to see what happens August 23rd against the Jaguars. I'm excited to see how this season progresses and how the Saints get better and what players add valuable contributions outside of Alvin Kamara and Michael Thomas and Demario Davis. I want to see what players shine on the New Orleans Saints roster. I want to thank you, Jeff, for coming on the show. I really appreciate it.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
Man, I really appreciate it. And you're working hard, and everyone in the New Orleans Saints media is working so hard. And then you guys have to put up with us on Twitter every week. So I know that's a second job, I know. So
I do have to plug our website and such, so I don't get yelled at. It's important. So yeah, make sure to check out odyssey.com/WWL. That's our website. Make sure to follow us on YouTube, which is WWL Sports. We have playlists for all of these training camp videos. I put up segments of the interviews that most of it is what I'm writing about, but it's a lot of good stuff on there. We're going to try to get into film study later in the year once all 22 returns. Hopefully we get that soon. But yeah, check that out. Make sure you tune in. Sports Talk every day, 4 to 8. Christian Garrick, as you've had on here, the Bobby Hebert, Mike Tillier, and a lot of other people. I'm on there sometimes. It's AM 870, FM 105.3, and that's my spiel. Thanks for letting me go through it.
No, you're fine. And can you tell them where to find you on Twitter?
It's my name with a little line. It's Jeff_Nowak, Nowak. And I get into arguments a lot, so strap in.
Definitely follow him. It'll definitely be entertaining, and you'll definitely be up to date on all Saints news. Thank you guys for listening. Stay safe. Be blessed. Peace.